Hello and welcome everyone. We're so excited to be here with you with Estelle Ecart and me, Inez Gay Eckel at L'École, bringing L'École to you all over the world, especially our dear friends in Asia. Hello. And we're going to have such an exciting subject today. We're going to look at precious fairies, from the fantasy to the reality. What are these fabulous beings? What are these fabulous beings that come to the forefront in beautiful high jewelry these days, the second half of the 20th century? Up till now, these creatures are being created by fabulous jewelers. Estelle, this particular fairy, we're so excited. She's going to be living with us at L'École very soon. She's the muse of L'École. Estelle, you are the guardian angel of this fairy because you are with the patrimony of the Maison. You are chief of projects for patrimony of Van Cleef & Arpels. She was born with the Van Cleef & Arpels Maison. Can you tell us a little bit about her?
Yeah, thank you, Inesita, for this presentation. Hello, everyone. So here today, let me introduce you this little winged fairy clip. One very important piece of jewelry for several reasons. First, it's a very iconic one for fairy jewelry in general, but also it is the first fairy clip ever created by Van Cleef & Arpels in 1941, so such a long time ago. The first one of a very long line of a fairy clip. And also, it is the muse of L'École, the School of Jewelry Arts, and you're going to welcome her very soon in your walls. So that's why we decided to make this conference. Before starting, before diving into this fairy universe, we wanted, Inesita and I, to really thank one of our dear colleagues, Cécile Lugan, a searcher and art historian who let us very kindly read her article about jewelry, fairy jewelry. It was very interesting. It is not published yet, but it will be very soon.
And Cécile sat side by side in L'École with me, particularly when she was doing her doctorate. L'École is involved. We have fields of research in all the different subjects of the jewelry arts, which must be properly nourished because they have not been. We have the classes. They are the very beating heart. They're happening right now around us. We're in the lacquer room, and next door, the gouache class is happening. Live classes. We come to you in your homes, in your living rooms, or wherever you are all around the world with our live conversations. We publish books. That comes from the research fields with people, great researchers like Cécile. We have the exhibitions. Right now, downstairs, we hope you can come. We have 3,000 years of Chinese gold right here in this building with people coming from all over the world to see it until April. All these different things L'École does. And thanks to really during the confinement when we were all at home, we developed this way of coming to you at home, which we continue to do. And it's incredibly precious to us. So today, looking at precious fairies from fantasy to reality, we're going to find out who are these beings. We're going to look from the mists of time, from maybe the forests of Northern Europe, the Celtic tradition, the fairy tales, the folklore, but also from literature, from Shakespeare, from Antiquity, ancient Greece, ancient Rome, even before. This feminine, powerful being, where does she come from? How does she end up in front of us like the muse of L'École, that gorgeous jewel? And we will get to the jewelry, won't we, Estelle? How are we going to start?
Exactly. So first we're going to talk about exactly what you said, the origins and the worlds of fairy. Where do they come from? Who are they? And what kind of attributes do they have?
And then these feminine figures, you saw the beautiful fairy in front of you with her touches of green and her touches of red, very important colors, and her beautiful form. How do women evolve into and influence the figure of a fairy in a jewel like that? And then finally, third chapter
is going to be really dedicated to jewelry and to mise en scène. What we call mise en scène is like the setting of the fairy inside precious objects, inside pieces of jewelry. And we're also going to see that actually nowadays the real fairies maybe are the craftsmen and women who are working in the workshops, giving really life to these kind of pieces.
So where, if we go all the way back in time, if we go back to ancient Greece and ancient Rome and even before, where do these fairies come from, Estelle?
Well, if we go back to Antiquity, we can see several figures, several divine creatures that can make us think of fairies. Maybe they are their ancestors. We don't really know, but we can ask the questions. For instance, we have the figure of what we call the fates. The fates were these deities who were threading the thread of life, spinning the thread of life of human beings, and they were cutting it when it was time, when humans were supposed to die. And these figures were really protecting them, protecting humans, and making the link, the connection between the magical world and the human world. And here, on this beautiful monumental sculpture, which is the Pergamon altar, you can see on the left Lachesis, one of the fates, here the woman who is fighting a half snake, half man creature that is oppressing men. And so this is the first figure we can think of. But there are others, and for instance, one which is also very important, the Potnia Theron, or the Mistress of the Animals. It's this very, very old figure, very ancient figure that connects the human world and the animal world. She protects nature. And here you can see it on this beautiful piece of jewelry. She's holding two rabbits, like as an evidence that she is with the animals, but she's also a winged creature. As you can see, she has wings, and we'll see later that wings are a characteristic of fairies. And also, as she's a protective figure, maybe this is one of the first protective pieces of jewelry. And keep that in mind, I said winged creatures. We have another one here with this beautiful gold earring. Quite interesting also. This time it's half a woman, half a bird. So she wears in herself, in her own body, the fact that she connects the human world and nature. And she has something very interesting. She carries a lyre, the music instrument here on her hand. And in ancient Greece, music was connected to divine and magical world.
The lyre is going to continue too. Let's hold the thought about the lyre. We're going to see that again, that stringed instrument. We're continuing looking for where are these powerful feminine figures in antiquity, in ancient times. There were the fate, like you said, the word Latin Fata is the origin actually of the word fairy eventually. Along with the fates are these other powerful feminine creatures, like the Maenads who serve Dionysus. They're these priestesses to Dionysus, later Bacchus, the god of wine. So they're also known as Bacchant. You may have heard of them as Maenads or Bacchant. The Maenads are, we can think of them as well-raised young ladies, well-raised proper ladies living in a very restricted society who can escape that life to run in the forest, to hunt, to drink wine, and there is evidence even found in archaeological samples that they may have had some other sort of psychotropic substances like magic mushrooms or ergot even. There's a lot of debate about that, and there's some interesting articles. So in any case, they ran free in the forests, they danced, they drank wine, they ran in the mountains, they climbed the mountains, and they would protect. They were seen as performing an incredibly important function to protect society. So they were allowed to be free and liberated. They were completely protected so that they could protect the society. This ring on the left is in gold. That's a seal. It's intaglio. The intaglio goes in. It's carved in. We made a stamp of it so that you could see, we didn't make a stamp, the Getty made the stamp, the Getty Museum made a stamp, and we're showing you, just like stamping into sealing wax, it's stamped into that beautiful gold ring so that you can see from 2,400 years ago how important the Maenad figure was. You see the sculpting of her flying veil like wings, and you see that in her right hand she holds something very important. She holds the thyrsos. It evolves from pine cones, and it will look very different as time goes by, but it evolves from pine cones on a stick. And she was seen to protect herself with the pine cones and with snakes from the over-affectionate satyrs who might chase her around. In fact, if we look here on this incredible hydria that's loaned by the Hellas and Roma Association to the fabulous Geneva Museum, which I found myself hypnotized in front of last month, this is an incredible figure of a Maenad Maenad, but here we have a Maenad who looks like a real proper lady of society. She happens to have a very long and flowing dress. She's very athletic, but look at her jewelry. She's loaded with pearls. And let's remember, pearls are the earliest and most important gem to humans. She's loaded with pearls. She's a wealthy lady. She's affluent. Her hair is properly done. She has the tambourine because music. Estelle will tell us about music, serving Dionysus and music being a part of fairies. Now the thyrsos is coming toward more like a magic wand, isn't it? It's really something that you can see. Next to it, we have a Diana huntress. We need to look quickly at a Diana huntress because the Diana huntress in this mosaic from Tunis is another example of the powerful feminine. Look at all the green too. Remember we said green is very important in the fairy world. Green is very important in the feminine world and in the world of symbolism. It's powerful and always connected with fairies. The huntress, the Diana, cavorts in the forest like the Maenad. So her dress is green and the trees are green. And she's so muscular. Doesn't she really look like an athlete? Let's look at it again because, of course, our discussion today, in less than an hour, is to come forward to the modern fairy. We're going to look at a ring in the British Museum. Now we have the cameo. Cameos came out. The sculpture came out from the sardonyx. It's on black sardonyx. Look at her. She's dancing, she's merry, and now her veil starts to look like wings, doesn't it? And even her dancing partner, his veil looks like wings. The little Cupid is playing next to her. But this is almost the time of Shakespeare's play, Midsummer Night's Dream. It's the late 1500s. It's a Renaissance piece. So let's go forward to this. We're actually going backwards, but in our imagination journey, we're going forward to 1432 to Ghent. Everyone must visit it, the Ghent Altarpiece. It's the reason why I'm even here today. It started me on my path of art and jewelry. And here we have basically a painting of the whole Christian religion on one beautiful scene in one beautiful day. The saints, God, the martyrs, everybody's there. But our focus today is the fountain. Why are we so focused on the fountain? We're focused on the fountain because in the pre-Christian tradition, the fountain really was the source for magic, for the connection to the afterlife, to the heavenly, and becomes a source also for fairies. And during the Middle Ages, the fathers of the church did this. They take now ownership of the fountain and of that otherworldly. And as you can see in this painting, which is such a masterpiece of all the ages, the fountain is right at the center. For that reason, and Estelle can tell us, she's really quite the expert on the fairy tales. She can tell us different fairy tales where the fairy actually comes from the fountain or the plot turns on the fountain. So here we're making a focus on the fountain of the Ghent Altarpiece. And when we look close, which you can do on the Closer to Van Eyck website, and our dear friend Paul and Celine are there behind the scenes taking care of everything. They can give you the link to the Closer to Van Eyck website. You can do what we're doing. You can see medieval goldsmithery, and you can see this fountain at the center of this religious painting with the angel reigning over the dragons. And from the mouths of the dragons is coming the water, the source of the magic, the source of the energy that's from that sort of nature world. And to the left and to the right, we have these winged figures. We're going to look at angels today because could angels possibly, winged angels, could they be also precursors to the fairy? Could they be ancestors of the fairy? Is that possible? You notice these winged angels, they don't have names and their faces are even turned away. The emphasis is on their wings, which look like real bird wings. And you can even see the beginning of little peacock eyes on the wings in the middle of this splendid lawn. And if you go closer, you're going to see the bottom of the fountain is strewn with real gems. The fact is that when we want to talk about medieval jewelry, and we want to hold me back, we have less than an hour, I promise to go fast. Medieval jewelry is my obsession, passion. We don't have much. It's mostly gone. Why is it gone? Because gold was very valuable. Gold was scarce. Gold was melted. Gold was recycled. It was very ecological. Therefore, the reliquaries tend to be where the gold was kept. Why? These reliquaries were these things where bits and pieces of the saints were literally kept. You can go to the Louvre and you can visit this spectacular reliquary crown, which is said to be of Saint Louis. It's later, but it's said to be of Saint Louis. Let's look at what's in this. There's goldsmithery. So there's a record of real jewels that people did have, but it's on a crown for a saint. look at the angels. Every single one's an individual. Every single one is a winged being with a beautiful classical drapery. And amid those angels are sapphires, rubies, turquoises, and ancient intaglios from ancient Rome. The fact is that, as we were saying, the church fathers, the church folks, the religious folks, are taking ownership and incorporating everything that's beautiful about antiquity into the Christian tradition, which is why we dare to posit that maybe these angels, like the one in the middle and the one on the right, that are goldsmithery works, might be precursors, not the ones with the big names, but angels like that might be precursors to our winged fairy, our beneficent winged fairy that we find, whom we find in jewelry. That's why we've made a quick focus on green wings in particular. Green wings on this slide. On both sides, we have a musical fairy on the left, a musical angel, excuse me, perhaps an ancestor of the fairy, with beautiful, gorgeous, verdant green wings.
With the lyre that we saw earlier.
She's playing music. So she's a musical fairy in the margins of a treatise about music and prayers. It's interesting because you may want to get a book that we're telling you all about that's easy to read and immensely entertaining, or watch on YouTube Michel Pastoureau, who talks about green and the power of green. The power of green is connected with spring, with the forest. That's why we see Diana with the green, with everything that's healing, with everything that's good luck, with everything that's health, positive energy. It also can be connected with some negative things like venom of snakes, like the European view sometimes that negative of dragons. For example, on the right, we have Saint Michael with his green wings. There's no dragon. Saint Michael has mastered the dragon already, so he's taken over the green of the dragon for the color of his wings. In the middle, it's what's called a pilgrim's badge. There were hundreds of thousands of these made, millions probably, and they were made by the people who are now going to invent printing in just a few years. And this one is a humble peasant's badge of a winged feminine figure who's sort of part dragon, part siren, part serpent, with the arc, and who's drawing the bow, like Cupid, like the goddess of love. She's a protecting common person's jewel that shows us that all these themes did show up in jewelry. It's just that the jewelry is gone. There's a fairy called Melusine. She's very important in France. She's, again, on every Saturday, she becomes, again, this half animal, half human person. She was cursed by her mother because she made a terrible mistake. Her mother was mad at her father, and her mother, the two sisters, walled the father up in a mountain forever. And the mother was so furious that she cursed the daughter to become every Saturday part animal. Raymondin, the guy in red who's spying on Melusine in her bath, is the husband. He's the ancestor of the de la Rochefoucauld, very famous family. And he had fallen in love with her and had begged her to marry him when she was in this form, when she was in the form of a lady, a beautiful lady, by a fountain, by the way. And Melusine had said, I'll marry you, but you have to promise to never look at me on Saturday. I have to have my privacy. Of course, it's tragic. He looks, she flies away, she leaves, and then she comes back. On the right, you can see a very early book. If you look at the lower corner of the right, she's coming back to nurse her children while everyone's asleep in the castle. And that's a really interesting, here she is flying away from the castle, and then, oh no, here she is flying away from the castle. And then in the other picture, we have her coming back at night to nurse her babies. What I wanted to do was to look for a second at the marriage, because look again, green tree, the promise of a happy marriage and healthiness, the green jacket, even the priest wears green, and even the groom wears green. That's Lusignan, ancestor of the Rochefoucauld. So you have this positive and negative. There's more negative in the Middle Ages, absolutely, and that's all sowing the land, fertilizing the garden for the fairy we know today. And really, you could say the frontier, the absolute departure for the fairy we know today is Charles Perrault and his fairy tales, right, Estelle?
Exactly. Since the 17th century, the fairies becomes to be seen as a very positive creature, and that's what we see in Charles Perrault fairy tales. Charles Perrault is is a French writer, and he wrote a lot of fairy tales, such as Cinderella, that I'm sure you know. Cinderella, the story of this woman who is oppressed by her sisters and stepmother, and who turns into a princess thanks to her godmother fairy, and meet the prince, but she has to leave, and that's what's represented here on this illustration. We wanted to focus on this fairy tale specifically and to focus on the way the fairy is represented through illustration. And as you can see here, this is the first edition, the one of 1697, the first edition of the fairy tale. And the fairy is nowhere. We cannot see her. We see Cinderella running away. She leaves her slipper, her glass slipper that the prince is taking up. But that's it. We don't see the fairy. So we just can imagine the fairy. And we have to move to the second image that we chose. It's like more than a century later that we have an engraving by Gustave Doré, who is also representing the godmother fairy this time and Cinderella. And as you can see, the godmother fairy is not what we have in mind when we think of fairies today. She is an elderly woman. She wears the clothes of a farmer or a maid, and she has apparently no magic powers. She has a knife in her hand to actually carve the pumpkin that is going to be turned into a carriage to help Cinderella to go to the ball, but she doesn't have any magic wands or anything. She has this knife, meaning in a way that the real magical power could be creativity, could be wisdom, the wisdom that comes with age. And here, this is the real representation of that. And we have on the side also the broom, which is interesting because in France, the broom is often associated to witchcraft and to witches. Is it a way to say that maybe this fairy is also a witch or a witch fairy? Would it be the same? We don't know. That's questions we can ask. And then we move on to another perception a few years later, the one from the 20th century by Edmund Dulac. And on this picture, we have a fairy which looks like princess of the 18th century, France, 18th century. She has this beautiful dress. She wears pearls, as you said earlier. She's quite beautiful, and she has in her hand the magic wand. This is the first time in our conference that we see the magic wand, one of these very specific attributes to fairies. And that's the kind of fairies that would later on inspire Disney, for instance.
Oh yes, Disney absolutely was French 18th century inspired, wasn't he? So taking from the 18th century to the 20th century, from the very beginning, how did our fairies evolve to these magical little creatures we know today? What were the ingredients in the soup, so to say, and how did the change happen really in those 100 years?
Well, actually, there is a shift. As you said, in the 19th century. Before that, as we can see on the painting, fairies, they are the one dancing on the side. Fairies seems very antique styled. You know, they have these beautiful veils, and they look very humans in a way. And in the 19th century, there is this shift where fairies start to become miniature fairy, very small, and that's what we can see on the second painting, the one by Richard Doyle, and that's the little creatures that you see at the bottom of the painting. The main character of this painting is actually nature. It's because during the 19th century, there is the beginning of the industrialization, and there is the yearn to come back to nature. And that's also what we say about fairies, that they connect us to nature. And that's in this sense that they become also very important, but not as real humans. They're really these magical creatures.
They are magical creatures in perfect harmony with nature, right? And the perfect harmony with nature always brings us back to the completely timeless story of Shakespeare. William Shakespeare, Midsummer Night's Dream, inspiration to perhaps it might be my favorite collection by Van Cleef & Arpels, Midsummer Night's Dream from 2003. It's literally magical. We could not resist showing you in the middle, and very connected to the Doyle painting, very connected to the Irish elves, leprechauns, and also to the Middle Ages, the little baby Puck, who's running everything like a master of an orchestra, and the little fairies cavorting again underneath the overarching leaves. If you look at the leaves and the moon in the illustration, the moon and all kinds of leaves with dewdrops dripping, and the moon behind him, he's like this little magical baby running everything. That's a view that was in the illustrations that everyone was buying. That was the best-selling edition of Shakespeare in that same time period, 1873. And if we look to the left and the right, if we look at Puck, brought to life magically by Van Cleef & Arpels in 2003 in this fairy. First of all, we find why we choose Van Cleef & Arpels Fairies and Jewels for this lecture. I literally, a lot of you know me really well, I banged my head against the wall for trying to find high jewelry fairies that were not Van Cleef & Arpels. In the business, in studying this since 1982, since before some of your parents were even born, I could not find anybody who brought to life high jewelry fairies like Van Cleef & Arpels. So here's Puck, and I feel very comfortable showing you. He's like the moonlight, he's in diamond, he's magically emanating from the vision of Shakespeare of Puck, with the magic potion in his hand. Like, what am I going to do with the magic potion? Puck, remember, reorganized and turned everybody's lives upside down several times during the show, during the movie. You can watch many movies about it. On the right, quickly, a fairy who seems to grow out of a flower. It's called Love in a Cage, this big, gorgeous orange flower that you can also eat that has vitamin C. And it's orange mandarin garnets that she grows from. She's very human. She's got a real human, athletic, kind of muscular sculpture to her, like you could say Diana the Huntress in ancient Rome. But she's got her lacy fairy wings. This leads us exactly toward discussing what are these images of women and of elves and the images of fairies, and how do they move forward from pre-antiquity into the jewels we find today, and what are the direct sources, especially for our muse of L'École, this Van Cleef & Arpels fairy.
Yeah, and in the 19th century, as we said, there is this shift, and so fairies start also to be represented as women, clearly as women, real women or fantasized women, and also that's what we see with the pre-Raphaelites. The pre-Raphaelites are a group of artists. It's a movement of the 19th century that fights against industrialization, against the machine, and who wanted to come back to a fantasized Middle Age, for example, and who were very inspired by Celtic cultures. And that's what we can see here. You know, you can see this, the first picture by Grimshaw, The Spirit of Night, where you see this fluttering above a very smoggy, very foggy city, maybe pollution. But she is the one from which light is emanating. She has light around her head, like rays of light, you know, like in a way, like a saint. And also there is this very interesting interplay of light on the painting, where you can see the light on water, and you have the feeling that maybe it's the reflection of the moon. But when you look at it, you have the feeling that the light actually comes from the magic wand that the fairy is holding. So it's very, very interesting. And on the second picture, this time the one by Sophie Gendreber Anderson, another pre-Raphaelite, we see a fairy who looks like a princess, a Celtic princess, with her hair, red hair, and her fair skin, and something also very, very nice. It's her crown, a butterfly crown. It makes us think about the Potnia Theron, the mistress of the animals we talked about before. And you can see in the background of the painting, you can see her wings, and in her hand, what is she holding? She holds a green pouch with pearls, green once again, as we said. And what is inside? Maybe a potion, magic potion, but is it good or is it bad? We don't know that.
The fact is that the fairy is born from that evolution of arts and crafts, pre-Raphaelite into Art Nouveau. Here we have three symbolism, Gustave Moreau, absolutely essential. We have the little green fairy as her nickname of Absinthe, and we have a very, very positive fairy who really was Christmas of 1904. We have three aspects. The Moreau is the symbolism. The one in the middle, the green fairy, is that kind of ambivalence. Do you see she has even snake jewelry on her arm, like ancient Rome or ancient Greece? And the one on the right is like your Sophie Anderson one. Mm-hmm. She has the beautiful peacock eyes on her wing. She has the light that emanates from that magic boat. She has everything to make us think of the positive.
And the lyre also.
And the lyre, the music again. Look at that. And the diadem like ancient Greece and ancient Rome. To look quickly at 3 jewels that sort of bear in mind what we just saw, we have the mistress of the animals again. This is a little magical lady mastering a giant sea dragon or seahorse with emeralds again, with the green. In the middle, we have A Girl by Lucien Gaillard, masterpiece, jewel, butterfly jewel, waking up from a dream. She's yawning, she's stretching. Perhaps she's waking up to ask for her rights. Perhaps she's waking up to say she wants to vote, she wants education. On the right, we have what we might call a suffragette fairy, because she's got green enamel, she's got white diamonds, and she's got violet on the tips of her wings. She's also another one of these coming alive, metamorphosing, feminine, dancing figures. Green, white, violet, give women the vote. That purple and that white and that green can often be a suffragette jewel. In the middle of the next look, let's look at stage design. So here we have exquisite stage drawings for the costumes for a play from exactly the same time period. The elf and the fairy are dressed like people from Antiquity. She has the whole draping of an ancient Greek or Roman dress. She has an iris now instead of the thyrsos, but it's a reference to the magic wand. And let's look at their wings. The green wings, we could think of the Van Eyck painting. The green wings with the little peacock spots and with the magical quality, but also the bird quality. And look at the antenna. Their heads become these gorgeous antenna pieces. What about that Sylvia on the left, Estelle?
It's quite the same. It looks like it has been inspired by this picture. The pendant, the Sylvia pendant by Maison Weber, is also a very iconic piece of fairy jewelry. And Sylvia is a character from a ballet. It is called Sylvia or Diana's nymph. So once again, Diana. And here, what is really interesting, and we chose to show it, is the fact that you don't really know if it's a dress, a costume, or if the woman is actually an insect. You know, her veil looks like wings with the enamel, and on her head, what is it? Is it a head ornament? Is it a crown? Or is it Antony, as you just said? And it is quite interesting, a bit frightening also, a very powerful piece. And on the other side, on the right side, you have another pendant, the Luis Masriera pendant, where you can see also a fairy, a woman who has wings. This time you can really see its wings because the wings seems to be attached to her back. And once again, we see the green color with the enamel on her wings, with the emerald at the bottom of the pendant, and the connection to nature with the flowers.
And also to the stage and the screen. These are actresses. They look like actresses. They're tremendously influenced by Sarah Bernhardt. She's the muse, she's the diva, she's the muse. So quick look at her poster for La Princesse Lointaine, and you see she's crowned by these lilies. You see the swirling red hair and the green, again with her name actually, by Musha. In the middle, we have this curious object when you look at it that way. It's marvelous that it's preserved in the Victoria and Albert. It's cellophane and fake pearls and glitter. It's worn on the right by Vivien Leigh, the immortal star of stage and screen, as she immortalizes Titania in a film made 4 years before the birth of our fairy, just 4 years. She's wearing that headpiece. It brings to mind that the real can be the fantastic can be the real, and look at her wings there. It also brings to mind how we're going to move forward to the modern fairy who's forever imbued in screendom. Hollywood, but also France, spectacular movies made in France.
Yeah, this is the movie called Peau d'âne, Donkey Skin by Jacques Demy. Peau d'âne, once again, is a fairy tale. It's a fairy tale that was told notably by Charles Perrault. And in this fairy tale, there is a fairy, but in the fairy tale, the fairy doesn't have such a big role. It's really with this movie that the character becomes bigger, becomes very interesting. The fairy, and you can see it here, it has inspired a clip by Van Cleef & Arpels, a violet clip with a lot of colored sapphires and also colored diamonds, which is quite rare. It's a beautiful one, and what is interesting about it is also the fact that you talked earlier about suffragette pieces, and this color, the violet, can be connected to women emancipation, and in a way, this fairy seems very free. And the clip, it's a contemporary one by Van Cleef & Arpels, and it announces the following one that we're going to see. It's our little winged fairy clip.
Because yes, it's a woman now, it's a powerful woman like Barbara Hutton on the left, who was legendary for owning this incredible piece, right, Estelle? And how did this piece burst onto the horizon?
Well, this piece was created in 1941, and it's not fortuitous, because 1941, it was the Second World War. It was a very dark time for the world, and it's as if the jewelers by Van Cleef & Arpels wanted to create the figure that's going to save the world, or at least that was lacking at the time. And that's something that the Maison Van Cleef & Arpels really worked on, especially in its communication, like on the advertising that you can see on the side, the one from 1944. It was almost peace at that time. So the fairy is at the same time presented as the messenger of peace. She's telling the good news, but at the same time, she's the one making the peace happening. It's like a peacemaker.
It's very touching over the darkened sky of Paris with the Eiffel Tower, this message of hope. And these fairies really are messages of hope with their green, their red rubies.
Yeah, and when we look at exactly how the fairy was made, it is very slender, you know, her silhouette is very slender, her wings are beautiful. There is really a play on the fact on how the gemstones were set. It has not been set on a mounting. It's a platinum thread surrounding the diamonds. And her head, her face is made with a rose-cut diamond that makes her feel very beautiful, you know, very a soft light emanating from this diamond. And we come back with the rubies on her head, you know, the head ornament, the crown, and in her hand, what is she holding? She's holding a star, a diamond, and ruby star, like a magic wand.
And she will be living with us for a few months until summer. Thinking about how she's going to be here at L'École, L'École loves to go into the history of jewelry design. We have a course that's very, very much love invested in that course that goes to the history of jewelry design. We can do that thanks to the Fond for the jewelry culture created by Van Cleef & Arpels. And here we have 3 designs. Let's focus just on the middle one to look at the drawing, the pencil drawing that shows us the movement being evolved by the jewelry designer so that this fairy can seem to move the way she does and defy gravity.
Mm-hmm. And we have also the 2 others that are interesting. The one on the left, it can make us think in France in what we call patriotic jewels, you know, patriotic because it was during the war once again. And she wears diamonds, sapphires, and rubies, gemstones that are white, blue, and red, you know, like the colors of the Allies flags during the war. So can be interesting to have that in mind. And on the other side, we have a very beautiful fairy, very beautiful design. Probably the fairy was never made, actually, but the drawing is beautiful, and you can see this veil. I think it reminds us of the Spirit of Night that we saw before, the painting we saw before.
The Grimshaw painting, your observation is incredible. And I love this, you do your insight you give us. Look at this. Tell us about this.
Yeah, we think that actually the jewelers, when they were thinking about making the fairies, they really draw inspiration from nature and from insects in particular. So we can see the one, for instance, on the left, it is inspired by the wings of dragonflies. As you can see here, it's really the same. You know, even the color, which is iridescent on dragonflies, it's here represented with the emeralds among the diamonds on the wings. The one in the middle, yeah. Beautiful. The one in the middle, we can see that it is inspired by damselfly. Damselfly, they actually have 2 pairs of wings too, but when they stop, the wings juxtapose. So you have the feeling that there are only 2, like on the one on the 1944 clip. And the last one, inspired by the wings of butterflies. You can see that they're really bigger. But in a way, if you really look at it, at this clip, you see that the wings made of openwork yellow gold, with this beautiful structure. It reminds us of what? It reminds us of lace, you know, as if it was inspired by fabric. And it makes us think of something. It's the fact that fairies are actually at the crossroads of the arts. And we chose this selection of clips by Van Cleef & Arpels also. One, the winged ballerina clip, inspired by dance. She's a ballerina too. The other one, the clip fait Titania. If you want to maybe say something.
Well, it's the Midsummer Night's Dream again. So if you think of Vivian Leigh in Midsummer Night's Dream dancing around in her magic immortal way, it's completely incarnated there.
Yeah.
And then from the sea, and then the stars.
Exactly, the star with the clip fait des étoiles, which is quite interesting because the fairy this time is put in the middle of a small landscape. And it looks like as if she is creating in front of us this landscape. You know, she's following, she's accompanying the movement of the stars all around her with this lapis lazuli pastels and rock crystals and colored sapphires. Quite beautiful.
Speaking of that, that's exactly it. Speaking of savoir-faire, the jewelry savoir-faire, the jewelry savoir-faire is our final chapter, which is how does the jeweler bring to life with this incredible mastery and virtuosity, as you said, becoming almost the fairies themselves, how do they make all this magic happen?
Since the 20th century, end of the 20th century and then beginning of the 21st that we are right now, Van Cleef & Arpels started to also make the fairies inside this small landscapes, inside what we call microcosmos. And this is the case here with the minaudière that you may know. Maybe you know this very precious object. It was created by Van Cleef & Arpels in 1933. And here we have a model of 2006 with this fairy. On the side, she is sculpted in relief, actually, and she's really standing out of the piece. And what is interesting is that she seems to influence the landscape around her because her wings have the same shape than the flower petals. So it's quite beautiful. And on the second piece, this clip, the clip fait Naïka, this time the fairy sits on a golden rock. You know, it seems like a rock. And she's the only one to be in white gold. She holds a diamond in her hand. And you can see that all the diamonds around, it looks like as if she scattered them around her.
And speaking of rocks, the rock of all time, the rock of marvels, Estelle. I remember living with this piece with our wonderful team here today for weeks when we were constantly, during the confinement, having the luxury of the Muséum National d'Histoire Naturelle, the Pierres Précieuses exhibition, because this work of art was there, right?
Yeah, this object was quite interesting. It was created for the exhibition Gems, and it mixes raw gems and it mixes raw gems and pieces of jewelry. And you can see there are two fairies actually on these precious objects. Two fairies that inhabit this precious landscape, inhabit this macrocosm this time, but they can also transform into real jewels as you can detach them to wear them. So it's quite the magic created in the workshops by the craftsmen and women.
And let's not forget the dragon to the left, reigning over his kingdom of green and pink tourmalines and the unicorn. So it's a whole world involving the green, the pink, the red, and this way of control and suspending of time.
Yeah, it's as if the fairy invited us to really put another look, to have another perspective on the world and also on time. If you think of it, when we look at the European fairy tales that we all know, the fairies suspended time several times, especially in the Sleeping Beauty, for instance. And that's what we can see on these two watches that we chose. On the one on the left, the fairy looks at a changing landscape because there is a rotating disc, and you see here the sun above the sky, in the sky, but it's going to turn around to let the moon that we can perceive here through the water, that's going to be up. And the other one, it's a ballerina who turns into a fairy when you push the button, and it indicates the hour, but it's not the indication of time, which is interesting here now. It's the spectacle.
And finally, to conclude, the Ondine, let's just watch this incredible film and see how here you have the culmination on these lily pads. This fairy wakes up and sort of runs the world, doesn't she? She runs her world.
Yeah, and as we said at the beginning, the title of this conference was From Fantasy to Reality, this is the real illustration of the transformation of a fantasy into something real. This automaton that was created by Van Cleef & Arpels, by a lot of very talented craftsmen and women, gives life really to this beautiful fairy that we just saw.
And it took years and years to make. When we're in, we're going to take your questions. Thank you so much from Paul and Celine. On the left, a beautiful citation from Midsummer Night's Dream from Shakespeare about the fairies. The fairy is speaking. And on the right, two fairies, we could say, in the mist, holding hands and holding a glowing bouquet of flowers, contemplating what makes us think of the Rocher de Merveille, the piece you just revealed to us, with also the butterflies like the Sophie Anderson painting, clustering magically to this rock with a vision of nature and humanity in harmony. What a hope for all of us, right? What a hope that maybe we can have that kind of balance and that kind of nature leading us into a magical, happy moment. Let's have a look and see what questions we may have from our dear friends. Someone is asking us about the Fée Clochette in the Peter Pan film. Absolutely, the fairies. Perhaps Estelle, you'd like to.
Yeah, Tinkerbell can actually make us think of the fairy clips that Van Cleef & Arpels created, but there is no direct inspiration. It's just that it's the same, it's at the same time, so it was the cultural context. So maybe one was inspired by the other, but we cannot actually be sure. But Tinkerbell is quite interesting as a fairy figure, because as you said, Inesita, Tinkerbell wears green, and she can be also sometimes very ambivalent, sometimes nice, sometimes not. Quite interesting one.
Can you tell us something about the dimensions dedicated? I think they mean the size.
Oh, okay. The size of the winged fairy clip. So it's actually quite big. It's 10.5 centimeters high. It's quite big, and there are a lot of precious stones. There are more than 160 diamonds. I think it's 162. There are 6 rubies and 42 emeralds. So it's very, very precious.
Why fairies are female in the first place? We'd love to see some male fairy pictures and jewelry. Well, that's it. We made that's one of the reasons why we chose the scene design from the Victorian period that's in the Victoria and Albert. Elves and fairies were kind of equal in the Middle Ages. It's just that most of those jewels were lost. This evolution toward the female is why we had the second chapter for whatever reason, and I think Disney definitely had an influence on that. But before that, it was Perrault. The fact that in the Perrault writing down of this oral tradition, Perrault chose to show us a lot of female fairies. But indeed, maybe that's an area for the future. Maybe more male fairies will show up, but it's very important to know that if you look at the medieval tradition, they are not so much identified as one sex or another. Another question is the automaton in a private collection as well, or is it in a museum, and are we able to visit the Ondine?
It is in a private collection, so it's not possible to see it again, but you can go on Van Cleef & Arpels' website if you want to go check the video again.
What are pilgrims' badges? Thank you. Pilgrims' badges are literally popular jewels that people acquired and kept and put on their clothing when they made their pilgrimages. You might have heard of the Saint-Jacques-Compostela, where people start in France, they go all the way to the far, far tip of Spain, they walk, they climb. It's a religious pilgrimage, like you make in China or in Japan doing a Buddhist pilgrimage. It's the exact same thing. But you would stop along the way and you would buy these badges and put them on your clothes as mementos. And when you arrived somewhere, for example, back home to the Seine in Paris, you'd make a wish and throw it into the river. So that pilgrim's badge that we showed you was fished out of the river during an archaeological excavation, and it's in the Musée Cluny. You must come with us, go to the Musée Cluny and see the badges. They were produced like printing, and they are the ancestors of books, because just a few years later, for example, the Gutenbergs, they used to make badges, now they make books. So they were popular jewels. It's kind of like our refrigerator magnets today or our selfies in front of the artwork. When we take a selfie in front of the Mona Lisa, it's exactly the same thing. Are fairies based on angels? This is a big field of research that, if we may say, that we're positing. We're saying, we're asking that question. Are they? All we know is that the fairy of today is a completely kind being that makes good things happen. We know that during the Middle Ages, these fairies become more and more, these angels become more and more prominent as good beings. We know that wings show up on these female figures and male figures that have divine powers all the way back, even in Mesopotamia. So that's a question to leave open. Are they based on or are they not? I'm having problems with my Face ID here. I don't know why my phone keeps locking up. Excuse me. I have to unlock my phone. So the one from 1947, the blue and rouge, does it have to do with after the Second World War? Yes. Red, white, and blue, blue, white, red, the English flag, the American flag, the French flag, the Allies. You will find these jewels rarely, but you will find them. Sapphire, ruby, diamond, the Allies, and peace. That's celebrating peace, it's celebrating the end of the war. So it's the festival time.
Yeah, but if you speak of the 1947 one, it's also a ballerina.
Yes.
And so it's very interesting because the Maison Van Cleef & Arpels was also very inspired by dance. And at the same time, when they started to make the first fairy clips in 1941, they also made a ballerina clip. And so both are actually, the two sources of inspiration are really intricate. And this clip is most famous for this connection to the world of fairies and the world of dance. And it's a beautiful fusion of the two.
Fabulous questions. How many fairies are made in a year? Almost none. This is very important. They're very rare.
Yeah, they're very rare. We don't have a precise numbers. But,
very few.
But it's an aesthetic which is part of Van Cleef & Arpels' signature pieces, signature collections. So very often a fairy is like magically coming out of the workshops, and so you may see them at the boutiques, but we cannot give a precise number. We don't know.
And I saw a beautiful question too, the final question, I think. Fairies and witches both use magic, but what is the difference between the two? So,
well, that's a very tricky question. That's what we were talking about it. There are no precise answer to, or at least we cannot give you today a precise answer. I think that at some point, fairies and witches were the same. You know, they were the same vision of the same thing, of a person, of a woman, most of the time, a woman who had magical power. And she could use her powers to do the good or what was considered good, or to do something bad, or something that was considered bad. And I think it's really in the 19th century, 20th century that decision is operating, that we really differ, we really make a difference between witches and fairies. But before that, they're quite, the same. It's quite intricate.
Well, I'm sure everyone's seen The Wizard of Oz. And in The Wizard of Oz, there's the good witch of the West, the wicked witch of the East. The good witch is, again, it could be a fairy. It's also about women, powerful women who are involved in nature. Mm-hmm. Powerful women, again, going all the way back to the Mistress of the Animals. These women who cavort mysteriously in the forest and who might collect herbal remedies. In the Middle Ages, they got very suspicious of women who lived alone and liked gardens and herbs and had cats. So I think that, and liked to read books. So I'm quite sure I would have been roasted on a slow fire very, very early in the Middle Ages. But in any case, maybe I was in another life, I don't know. But someone's talking about a 15th century painting. I see the question is involving Melusine. I think it's the marriage of Melusine. You say there's a 15th century painting with a fairy wearing jewelry. Does that add to her power? I think that picture of Melusine is, thank you for the question, is more showing when she's a real girl. She's a happy, real girl at a happy marriage. And that's the side of her, that's the real happy girl, the mom. In fact, in the tradition of de la Rochefoucauld family, she built all their chateaux in one day, 17 chateaux. Mm. And even the de la Rochefoucauld family still has that incorporation of the Melusine fairy in their coat of arms and in their tradition. So again, that's a totally good aspect. And that's why we look to ancient Greece and ancient Rome to show that ambivalence and how sometimes good, sometimes naughty, it's mixed. I think that's our final question, and we thank you so much. Let me just see. For the ballerina clip made of emerald, George Balanchine used green to represent the French school of ballet. Is this related to the color green in the fairy tale context? Do I need to pay you for these questions? I love that question. Of course, green, the ballet Balanchine, jewels, green, red, white. green. Gabriel Fauré, his beautiful natural music, which is coming out of the Art Nouveau, coming out of the Pre-Raphaelites, celebrating just the green of nature. Absolutely connected. Check out Michel Pastoureau in English, published by Princeton University Press. Red. Red is, again, in that fairy, the red of good luck, of health, of vibrancy. Stravinsky's music, jazz, New York. White, Tchaikovsky, the St. Petersburg, his origin. So I think yes, don't you?
Yeah, just to make a precision about that, if the question was really about the piece by Van Cleef & Arpels, the piece by Van Cleef & Arpels was inspired by the ballet. The ballerina clip was inspired by the ballet. So I don't know if the choice of the emerald was connected to this, no. but at least the choice of the emerald was connected to the three parts of the
theme.
ballet.
Yes,
that's
indeed.
For sure.
That's very important. The ballet was invented in 1967.
Exactly.
The clip is made in 1941.
Yeah.
But the themes are related.
Yeah. Totally.
Thank you. Thank you, Estelle. I think we're good, and I think our time is running out. Do we have one more question, or I think we covered everything? We thank you so much. We would like to invite you to the next conference, the next talk, the next conversation, which is going to be not on magic wands, but on swords, which are kind of like the men's version of the magic wands. It's going to be a spectacular conversation with the great Thierry Vendôme, who is a great friend of the school and who's on our YouTube. Paul and Celine can give you the playlist to watch Thierry and other YouTube conversations. He will be coming to talk about the academician's sword made for Pascal Horry, with Pascal Horry, Thierry Vendôme, and Leonard, our colleague and friend Leonard Puy. So do tune in for that, and then do, of course, join us via the social media, via Instagram and Facebook if you can. Send your messages to us by the usual ways you send our messages, like the way you signed up for the lecture, for the talk, for the conversation. And stay tuned and join us next time. Thank you so much, Estelle.
Thank you, Nesita.
And thank you, Celine and Paul. And we were very happy to be with you today.
Thank you very much.